All righty, everybody. We are here with Christopher Shasse. He is from Rocketman Tech. I had the privilege of seeing them in Nashville. We were at the Jamf investor slash user conference, JNUC. One of the, I would say, more prolific events I've seen in a while for tech companies. I go to the Adobe Maxes. Nutanix has their showing. Salesforce has Dreamforce, and there's other ones out there that are big in scale, but I think Jamf stuck out in terms of the happiness of the customer base, the level of quality of the people that were there, from partners and the ecosystem at large, the management team, and then just the energy that was around the city. But I wanted to welcome you here today to really dig deeper into Jamf from a company level, talk a little bit about Rocketman Tech. You're the owner and founder there. So how are you doing today?
Yeah, thanks so much, Sean. Great to meet you, and thanks for inviting me on the podcast. Doing great today.
Yeah, so tell us about where you're at. Obviously, we just talked, and you're sitting in Brazil. But where you're at, how you kind of came about in terms of founding and the owner of Rocketman Tech.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot happening after JNUC in Nashville. Exciting conference. So our story is I started working for Jamf back in 2015 as a professional services engineer. So I helped people set up their Jamf Pro server for the first time. In 2017, I found the need in Jamf for kind of higher level support, something Jamf doesn't really give because they're a software company and not a services company. So I started Rocketman Tech with the graces of Jamf to kind of help people manage their Jamf servers moving forward. Since then, we've grown, have a lot of clients and around the world. We have users around the world. We have employees all around the world helping people manage their Jamf Pro servers.
Cool. One thing, most listeners, unless you are an Apple user and you're an Apple user sitting inside of a enterprise, likely don't hear about Jamf. Even if you are in an enterprise that uses Jamf, you may not even hear about Jamf. If you could just share a little bit about what they do. I'm going to show actually a little diagram here too, as well, just for the people that are watching. This is the state of Jamf. I mean, they serve 8 of the top 10 Fortune 500, 7 of the top 10 Fortune 500 of technology, 15 of the largest global universities, it seems, 16 of 20 of the U.S. largest hospitals, 9 of 10 of school districts, 10 of 10 of top banks. Just those numbers alone say a lot about, who Jamf is and what they're doing. The average person doesn't know about them. So I think it's important for everyone to, hear it from you of, what they do in the space they play in.
Yeah. And I think the important thing to realize is that IT has historically been more Windows-based over the years. And Jamf started in 2003. And it's IT software to manage Mac computers. And they also do iPhones and iPads, but back in 2003, we didn't have those. So Jamf started in a really interesting time where no one was betting on Apple. And they've grown along with Apple. They've created this amazing community that you've seen at JNUC. And that's why they have so much of that market share, even though people haven't heard of them. They've been around for quite a while and are the gold standard in this industry for how to manage Apple devices across the board. So Apple has been growing like crazy in the enterprise because Apple has grown like crazy over the last 20 years into one of the most valuable companies in the world. So Jamf's sitting in this really strategic spot of being the first people in here, creating this amazing community and having an amazing product, a bunch of products really, to work with all of these different types of Apple devices. They're sitting in a really good position right now to kind of grow as people transition from IT transitions from solely Windows devices to having a variety of different devices, including Mac computers.
Got it. Now, somebody that is a Jamf user to some degree, obviously, just talk about who is actually making decisions on who to use Jamf, and then what that end user experience is when they're using Jamf.
Yeah. So, and there's two different types of people that are using Jamf, right? There's people like us that are the administrators which are kind of controlling all of the Mac computers in an organization using the Jamf Pro portal. So we're logging in and we might be managing anywhere from like 50 to 100,000 computers or iPads or iPhones. And then there's the actual users that are the individual employees that are, they probably don't really know what Jamf Pro is because it's running on their machine in the background. And it's doing all that stuff, making sure their software is up to date, making sure they're getting the right software on the computer, and making sure they have the right security settings in place that the security team wants on those computers. So the general user probably interfaces with something more like self-service, which is an application that the employee can open and be able to install software. But they might even not even know self-service because you can rebrand that to whatever your company is. So in your case, you could deploy Avory service to all your computers, and then people can go in there and download software they need or run quick fixes or anything like that.
Got it. Okay. So you have the admins on one side that are essentially overseeing their entire organization. And then on the other side, you have, the users that are engaging with their hardware to some extent. And then the company's software and services and applications. And Jamf is kind of that entry point and or, management layer across all of that. Over the last several years, and I have another image here, which shows the overall kind of innovation / the history of what has happened at Apple / Jamf. And you can see that they've gone from kind of like mobile devices to iPads to, richer and bigger and faster MacBooks, all the way now to, Vision Pro. And, historically, they talked about the car. Just talk about, how the strength of Apple, how that leads to possibly the strength of Jamf as a company.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they are completely tied together. If you look at that graph, like again, Jamf started in 2003. Apple was about to go bankrupt in 2003. Zach Helmstead, who started Jamf Pro along with Chip Pearson, Zach went to the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, also the university I went to. And it was built because he was walking around to all these different computers, having to get information from the computer and just like writing it down on a piece of paper. So he wrote a bash script to do that automatically. And that was the beginning of what Jamf Pro was. And then he started selling that to a bunch of universities. So you see 15 out of 15 universities on your other slide. It was initially built for universities. So there's a large presence in that area. They also have a huge market share when it comes back to like enterprise environments too. But yeah, I mean, Jamf would not exist today if Apple hasn't grown so much, because they basically put all their chips in on Apple, and it obviously paid off in a large extent.
What sticks out here on the slide, which is in 2010, Apple as a customer. And as an investment group, right, we're obviously trying to see, is there a competitive advantage for a company? And a lot of my efforts, heading to Nashville was sitting down with customers and really trying to pick apart, what are some of the nuances and some of the competitive threats that exist. You saw some of them on the street trying to, take some of the Jamf customers and, give them bar tabs for free and some other things. And that didn't seem to be working from just a mindset and mind share standpoint. But Apple as a customer in 2010 or so, whatever I said, to today. And a lot of the Apple on the keynote, you had some of the Apple team up there. My point or question is really, what does that signal to the competitive threat to a Jamf if the obvious one is Apple moves into their territory, right? And says, you know what, we don't need that. Mind you, they're doing $200 billion of revenue and, Jamf isn't. So is it that big a space to, make a dent for themselves versus having like a best in class, independent vendor kind of doing it? So how do you think about Apple as a customer? What does that signal? And then obviously we can go to the, 5,000 pound, gorilla or whatever, Microsoft, and what's going on there. But first off, with Apple as a customer and your views on that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously that says a lot. If Apple was a customer back in 2010, still is a customer now, even though they have built their own platform. They've actually built their platform multiple different times. They have Apple Configurator. They had Profile Manager with it, which they ended up discontinuing. And they bought Fleetsmith and built that into Apple Business Essentials. But they still use Jamf Pro because all those solutions they built aren't really meant for any type of enterprise environment. They're more for small to medium sized businesses. So they've created like these products. Apple Configurator was like a side project that someone made, not even officially through Apple, that Apple just decided, hey, we're going to make it official. So Apple's never really invested a ton into this specific field. They've been investing more in it, but I don't see them potentially taking it over. And I think one other reason they wouldn't want to do that, like they have with some stuff, you know, like the AirTag kind of destroyed Tile, right? But one of the big reasons is because with AirTag, someone can just buy a new AirTag and everything's good to go. With an MDM server, switching, 100,000 devices from Jamf Pro over to some new solution that Apple made is not an easy process. I don't think Apple would even ever want to migrate their devices over to a different platform just because the overhaul would be crazy to try to do all of that work.
Sure. So. Yeah. I mean, I guess the question there, and it's a question that just added to me is, you mentioned they're going after, or not going after, but they have a product available for small midsize. Eventually small midsize becomes big business, some of them. And, is it basically cutting out the top of funnel for big business, as Apple is having these users on that kind of small to mid-sized tier, trying to evolve their platform and pushing up to the enterprise? Or do you think, they kind of just sit tight? Again, if you go back in history, maybe this has been their strategy the whole time and they haven't made any sort of dent inside of the enterprise. But I guess that is a competitive threat that maybe an investor would be thinking about, is small, mid-size being managed by Apple to some degree, even though, again, some of the numbers I just shared in terms of 75,000+ customers, not every customer is obviously large. So if you could just have some comments around, that view.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think that is a big concern for investors of having, these smaller companies go with a platform that's not Jamf and growing into a bigger company. So like, where does that leave them in like 10, 15, 20 years down the road once these small companies become juggernauts later? As far as Apple Business Essential goes, right now, I don't think the adoption is super big. I wish I had numbers on that, but I don't see a lot of people across the board really considering it as much a solution. I don't really love it as a management platform. It's built around Apple IDs, which people kind of hate from a management perspective. They're very limited. Maybe in 5 to 10 years, it'll get a lot better and be something that people can actually use. But I don't even see small to medium-sized businesses really using Apple Business Essentials. There are other MDM platforms that those small to medium-sized businesses are kind of going into. But I don't see a lot of people. I don't see Apple Business Essentials being a big threat to Jamf, mostly because people aren't using it.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Now we turn to the monster in the space. And that's Microsoft. You had a YouTube video, your company, it was you speaking, but it was Rocketman Tech. I think that's, look it up on YouTube, and I'll put kind of the link on the bottom. Anyone that's trying to analyze it, from a product perspective, which I think is important from an investor perspective. So I sat there through it, and I thought it was, again, one of the better. I wish every company had this. Somebody on the outside, counter, balancing and analyzing, the core product and then the competitive dynamics. So good job on that. But in general, I think, you did a good job there, trying to bring that to this conversation, which is Microsoft has Microsoft Intune, which is a product really for that Microsoft ecosystem, but it does have some capabilities or a pretty decent amount of capabilities for the Apple ecosystem. So start there on, your just generalized observations on Microsoft as a peer. competitive peer to Jamf.
Yep, absolutely. So I do think Microsoft Intune right now is probably Jamf's biggest threat in the market. And there's a couple reasons for that. One being right now, with the economy, people are looking to consolidate their tech stack to try to save money on licensing and also save money on support. They don't want to be supporting so many platforms. So people have always been interested in this, but I think more so in the last couple of years, people have become more interested in that as interest rates have risen. And Intune has gone through a lot of transformations. It used to be SCCM, and then they created kind of two different products. One was SCCM and Intune, and they've rebranded both of those, and they finally consolidated it into one platform. So Intune has gotten quite a bit of capabilities in the last 10 years from where it was. SCCM didn't really do much at all for Mac devices. And I think the biggest thing of why so many companies are thinking of moving over is because right now, with the way Intune's licensing is if you have, 10,000 users, you have a license for both a Windows and a Mac computer for each one of those users. And a lot of people are using that for like Microsoft Office. So they just kind of bundle everything together. So they already have the licenses for it. So if you have 500, 1,000 Macs, those Macs are free based on your licensing. So people are really looking and they're like, if we can eliminate all this Jamf stuff, we can save a lot on licenses. And that's why we wanted to make that video to show companies like whether or not that's a good idea for them. And our basic analysis was, and again, migrations take a lot of work. We do a lot of migrations and we make them as easy as possible. But when it comes down to it, there's a lot of friction in that process. You're going to lose a lot of productivity, have a lot of downtime, and it's going to take a lot of work to get them moved over. So you want to make certain that this is the right platform for you before you do that. So if you're, basically the thesis of the video is if you're a company that has like 50 Macs, maybe you have 10,000 Windows devices and 50 Macs, and they're currently not under management, and you're not planning on expanding, Intune's a great platform for that. If you have 500 Macs and you want to move them to Intune to save a little bit on licenses, that's probably not going to be the greatest idea, at least not right now with some of the limitations of Intune.
Do you guys do both? Do you guys help work on both of those, or are you strictly Jamf, like Intune to Jamf, or do you kind of have this hybrid approach internally?
At this point right now, we're only Jamf Pro, and we're always evaluating out of the platforms to see if they would work for us. But Intune definitely wouldn't. The limitations for at least what we do would not really, it would make it a little bit too hard for us to be able to work efficiently. So we don't really do anything with Intune specifically. If someone wants to move to Jamf Pro to Intune, which again, I don't recommend, we can set up a workflow and help them move those devices over. That's really the only aspect we'd work in Intune, but then it's up to another admin to kind of take it over and manage it.
Got it. Okay, cool. Jamf versus Intune again. Part of our post-mortem, after JNUC was really around, the question of, there's clearly Intune. There's this clear ecosystem that is big, large, and puts a little bit of roadblocks in place for, and we'll talk about security in a little bit, around other, product lines / the ability to grow further inside of a company. So there's either, you bridge the gap and you have a cooperation with Intune forever. You rely on Apple gaining more penetration inside of that ecosystem, and that's how you kind of grow. And then eventually, you tilt the scale, and then the whole organization kind of works off of Jamf versus the other way around potentially. Or you have some sort of product line that is good, is in quality enough that is on the Microsoft side. Mm-hmm. Of all those options, and else, we were trying to talk to some people there, but of all those options, do you think it's actually realistic that Jamf eventually comes up with, a real enterprise grade Microsoft solution, or the fact that Intune is bundled, it kind of it makes it really hard for a company to for Jamf to monetize that, really, I guess, is probably the best way to think about it. But any thoughts around that? I'm sure you've thought about that for years to some degree.
Yeah. So you're basically talking about like one MDM to rule them all, one MDM to manage Windows, Macs, iPhones, iPads, Android, Linux,
Everything.
across
You're
the board.
basically
Yeah.
the platform of management across your organization. And logically, that makes sense. Numerically, may not. Engineering wise, also may not. So there's a lot of nuances there. And then,
Yep.
obviously from a marketing perspective, you have this very focused marketing, which I think has sold well for 2 decades. The question is that next phase of growth? You have 75,000 customers. You have 10 of the 10 largest banks. The numbers can go on. The question is the next phase of growth. And again, we'll talk about security, but in general, it's more penetration to more devices. You're either riding the coattails of Apple and them penetrating and creating, I guess, new form factors of devices that potentially you can manage. Or again, there's another way of capturing other devices, and I don't know if I'm sure you've thought about it. So I just wanted to, pick your brain to hear what you're thinking about.
Yeah. Where Jamf's going next. So, there's a couple places they go. If they stay just in the Apple space, which is kind of what they're doing still, they've been expanding. So they initially just had Jamf Pro, which was really just for enterprise companies and universities. It didn't really work for small companies like under 50 devices very well. Then they created what was called Bushel. It's now called Jamf Now, to help with those smaller devices. Then they started buying other companies. They bought Nomad, which then became Jamf Connect. They bought another company, I forget the name, which then became Jamf Protect. They also bought Zulu Desk, which became Jamf School. So they've started to kind of acquire these other companies to build it into their stack, similar to what Adobe does. They then purchased Wandera, and that's been kind of an exciting acquisition that does a bunch in like threat defense, as well as kind of operates as a VPN. That, interestingly, just because Wandera did it, that does manage Windows. So technically, you can use a product through Jamf to manage Windows computers. It's not anything similar to what you can do on the Intune side, for sure, but it is a little bit of management if you just have a couple of devices and you don't want to get out of the Jamf stack. They also introduced screen sharing, similar to TeamViewer or something like that, so you can do remote screen sharing with a user. One thing they haven't gone into in this space, which they may go into in the future, is identity management. So something like Okta, or Microsoft also has Entra AD, but that would allow them to build out like platform SSO and those types of things. They're a little limited in their capabilities with what they can do just with Jamf Connect, because they have to integrate with an identity provider. And do you want me to explain what an identity provider is?
Yeah, go.
Or do you think your audience understands that? Yeah. So an identity provider is just it's just a different way to like log into all your resources. So if you have an application like Okta or Entra AD or even Google Workspace, you can log into one portal and get access to all your applications. It's a much more secure way of logging in, because passwords are not secure. We've known this forever. Even two-factor authentication, like using SMS for authentication, is not secure either. There's ways people can hack into that and be able to get your phone and stuff like that. Having real like multi-factor authentication with something like Okta, where it uses like Face ID or something like that to be able to authenticate, way more secure, way more user-friendly, a lot better. So I think if Jamf moves into that space, it would allow them to do a lot more, and then also gain more market share within this Apple space. But
got it. Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So security, identity are, attached at the hip to some degree. We'll jump in there, into security, and you talked about Wandera and some other stuff. This is a big opportunity. It has been a big opportunity for them. Security is now, 25% or so of their business, and, growing 20+% in ARR, annual recurring revenue. And so, my going table to table in Nashville was really around the idea of trying to understand the opportunity there, the impediments there, and I got a little bit of both of those. I think most of the customers at the conference were expressing the interest or going through the process of testing the product today in terms of some of their security products. The biggest headwind, I guess, was going back to everything we've just been talking about, which is, here I have a company with 2,000 employees, of which 500 are using, Apple devices. And I'm talking to the admin clearly here. And you have 1,500, Windows devices. But a lot of the decisions for security are, part of the security team inside of an organization versus, some of the admins or management layers. So there's kind of a semi disconnect. And even with that disconnect, obviously some of the numbers I referenced before around the strength in the product and the capture today, I think in one of their earnings call, they said 40% of net new deals have security attached, which seems like an opportunity to continue to grow. But the impediment is everything we talked about before. So how do you see the security product? Is there more room to grow there? You talked about identity, which again could be an interesting addition to the suite. Just talk about security.
Yeah.
What do you see
for
there?
sure. And I'll say, I'm an Apple administrator. That's where my expertise lies. I'm not really in the security realm, so I can't say a whole lot to like all of the security tools that Jamf has. What I can speak to is how it works on the computers, performance and things like that, and how easy it is to deploy. And from that side, Jamf Protect and Jamf Threat Defense is way better than anything else I've seen when we look at CrowdStrike. Obviously, CrowdStrike had some recent problems with kind of the way it operates, with trying to take over like some parts of the operating system. Luckily for Apple, they locked a lot of that down with system extensions, saying, hey, you can't have this kernel level access to the system. We see that as a danger. And obviously it showed in recent news that is a danger. So Jamf Protect, even from the beginning, before Apple required all this stuff with system extensions and things like that, they had a kernel. They never did anything with the kernel. And they've always had a way of making things very user-friendly and not having such a heavy hand when it comes to security. Because in the end, there's two risks with security. One is that you might get a virus, but the other is that the security software that you have could also break your computer. So from like an admin perspective, Jamf Protect is my favorite security product. From the security side, it seems to be operating exactly like it should, but it's usually other departments that are kind of working on that end to make sure that they're evaluating the proper threats and things like that.
Got it. Yeah. Last thing, really around conversations at JNUC. We have a couple more minutes here, but and then we'll wrap it up. But just high level, your takeaways. You got back home in Brazil, and you probably sat down and kind of reassessed, all the events that occurred and some of the excitement or questions, opportunities. What is your post-mortem of the conference as a whole?
Yeah, this was a super fun conference, of course, as it always is. From our perspective, we were very busy the whole time, talking to people, setting up meetings. We had a lot of interest in what we were doing. We had our parties we were throwing. So a lot of our takeaways was like, let's take all these meetings that we set with all these different companies and organizations, and let's look at all the different things that Jamf has announced. They announced a lot of stuff and we had a kind of post-mortem in our, monthly launch pad where we have a bunch of Jamf admins meet and talk about Jamf stuff. And just talked about some of those updates. And a lot of them, and we see this a lot, they'll talk about like, hey, we got this amazing new feature that's coming. And it's like, okay, well, what can you actually see in a keynote? And there's a lot of speculation on what it will look like when it comes. I think what we're seeing is Jamf starting to transform the product into something that's going to be more future-proofed and allow them to develop, because this started in 2003. They've got a lot of legacy code and stuff like that. They need to move past that. So I think what they're doing is starting to build a second product that works inside of the first product. And this is all speculation. That will allow them to do a lot more capabilities that they're kind of limited by right now based on using MySQL, Tomcat, and things like that.
Got it. Cool. Yeah, we'll end there. We're here at the top of the hour. What I wanted to do was, give you a second, really to talk about, where people can find more, who's the right user. We probably have plenty of people that are going to listen to this that, have an Apple ecosystem at work and, may or may not have a managed, department. But more importantly is, where can they find more about Rocketman Tech and what you guys are doing?
Yep. If you want to find more about our company, we're at rocketman.tech. That's rocketman.tech. We have a monthly Launchpad meetup. So if you're an Apple admin or just want to know a bit more about Jamf, Apple, and Rocketman, come to that. That's going to be rocketman.tech/Launchpad. It's right on the top bar. If you're on our website, it'll give some more information on that and how you can join those meetups. They're essentially really large Zoom calls where we just have a bunch of people to talk about the latest Apple and Jamf updates.
Cool. Yeah. I watch your, keep going. Sorry.
Oh, and if you want to shoot me an email, maybe I shouldn't say this, but my email is chris@rocketman.tech. You can shoot me an email directly if you have any questions or want to set up a meeting with us.
Cool. All righty, man. I'll post those stuff on the bottom. I did watch your last meetup. It was good stuff. With that, we'll go and I appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Son. Thanks for having me.